The report from the UN says more than 1 million children have become refugees during the civil war. That is an astonishing figure, especially because it is more than half of the entire refugee population as a whole. At least 3,700 refugee children are unaccompanied by or separated from their parents in those regions. I spoke to Antonio Guterres, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. He actually toured a camp in Lebanon, very close to the Syrian border. I asked him what struck him most after his day near the Syrian border on the Lebanese side. Here's what he said.
I think that the most dramatic for me was to speak with children that were clearly traumatized by violence. Children telling stories of their houses being destroyed or of members of their family being killed and having seen that. And I remember that in my last visit to Zatri in Jordan, when I was in a tent talking to a family, their young boy was constantly shooting with a toy gun, and it was impossible for the parents to stop him. And it was something compulsive, a kind of violence that was now inside him. So this kind of trauma that requires a lot of psychosocial support that unfortunately we are not always able to provide, this kind of trauma is, in my opinion, the biggest risk for this generation. And then, of course, I'm always very worried when I see children out of school, when I see young boys especially doing child labor, when I see stories of sexual harassment and all the other dangers that children have when they are in a foreign country, and sometimes when they are difficult to protect.
In your professional experience, what does the impact, the long-term impact of having hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of school-aged children forced to work, away from families, psychologically traumatized, what does it do to this generationally to those children?
I think that it is the risk of a lost generation, and that is why with UNICEF, with many other agencies, a campaign is being launched called No Lost Generation, asking for massive support of the international community in order to bring the Syrian children to school, and only 1/3 is at school at the present moment, the refugee children, in order to make sure that psychosocial support is much more extended to be able to cover much more of the affected children, and at the same time to be more effective in mobilizing capacities and helping the countries, protecting the children against illegal labor, against, for instance, situations in which young girls are driven into prostitution by their own families because of lack of resources. All that requires a much stronger capacity, both of the humanitarian agencies, but also of the states of the region that are now struggling with a huge influx that is having an enormous impact in their economies, in their societies.
Right. These host states are carrying a very heavy burden, of course, at this point. But you're launching an appeal, No Lost Generation. Do you get the sense that the world has not been moved, has not been touched by the plight of Syrian refugees, specifically Syrian children, enough? That people aren't paying enough attention, not donating enough money?
Guterres paid a visit to Khalda to mark its opening and to stress the pressures and challenges being faced by host communities.
There is many people motivated. We have testimonies from all over the world and financial support from all over the world. But the problem is that it is out of proportion of the needs, out of proportion with the needs of the refugees themselves, and out of proportion with the needs of the countries hosting them. I am in Beirut. Lebanon has today 25% of the population being Syrian. 800,000 are registered refugees. In the United States, it would mean 56 million refugees coming all of a sudden into the country. You can imagine what the reaction would be. And Lebanon is not a rich country, and Lebanon has been, to a certain extent, abandoned by the international community. So our appeal is more and more for the countries of the region, for Lebanon and Jordan, but also for Turkey, for Iraq, namely in Kurdistan, to be much more supported by the international community, because if not, at a certain moment, they will not be able to cope with this challenge.